Ladies and gentlemen, I got a special guest here with me to talk about Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. Nicole, we have to hurry up and finish this recording before the first crow cock. Wait a minute, what is it? I got to redo that. The first cock of the crow, right? I got to redo.
There we go. You got it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new episode of Two Peas on a Podcast, where we review the latest and sometimes greatest movies every week. Gerald is here with you, and Nick is off this week. He is under the weather. He is sick. Hopefully he's not in Orlok's castle right now. I'm not sure, but he is not feeling good. So I had to get a special guest in here, and a dear friend of mine who's been on the show before, and we're in the same critics group here in North Carolina as well. Culture Cabinet, I know she does also. Nicole Ackman. Nicole, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this movie.
Of all movies I could have pitched at you, were you surprised that it was Nosferatu?
On one hand, yes, because
Yeah,
horror is not my normal thing. On the other hand, anything historical
I
drama
know.
is my thing, and gothic
Yeah.
horror in particular is my thing. So
Okay.
I was very excited.
Okay. Well, that'll come into play then when we talk about the movie. So,
Yeah.
obviously, if you saw the title card, you know we are reviewing Robert Eggers' new film, Nosferatu, which, of course, is a remake slash reimagining of the 1922 Murnau film that featured Max Schreck in a pretty iconic role as Count Orlok. It was a silent film. German expressionism and, like you said, gothic horror, of course. And that's Robert Eggers' kind of game anyway. So I'm really excited to talk to you about Nosferatu. Now, what we do for every episode, Nicole, before we start talking about the movie itself, is we like to give our scores out of 10. You and I have not talked about it prior to the recording. We
Yeah.
don't know what each other thought of the film in terms of a score. So we're going to do that right now as what we call the early score reveal.
Damn it! This always happens. I think I'm gonna score and then I never score. It's not
Ready? I'll
fair.
count us in, and then we'll
Yeah.
we'll flash the camera here. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1 on Nosferatu. Look at this.
Look at that.
Two folks, it's 2 10s. It is a 10 out of 10 from both of us, which
Yep.
is a 10 out of 10 overall on Nosferatu.
Dang,
Wow.
all right.
I don't
I'm
think
excited.
anybody yeah, I don't think anybody listening is surprised that I dropped a 10, but I didn't know. I'm like 8, 9, I'd be really thrilled, but a 10 out of 10
Yeah.
Nosferatu, Robert Eggers. We'll do spoiler free here for a few minutes. Nicole, you're the guest. Tell me what you loved about this thing.
Absolutely. Well, I think, as someone who has Crimson Peak in my top 4 on Letterboxd,
Hmm.
it was obvious as soon as this was announced that I was really going to be interested in it. I love Eggers' films because as a historian myself, I really appreciate his attention to detail, his commitment to proper period costuming and set design and hair and makeup and all of that. So on the one hand, I don't think it would have mattered like what he was doing with the rest of the movie. Like the moment that I saw the hairstyles that they had on Lily Rose Depp, I was like, I'm sold. But I think that this movie is so interesting. It's so atmospheric. It is really fun, I think, in this time that we're getting all of these like remakes and reboots of older things, to have a remake of a film that is from 1922 that is so different from this iteration of it, that obviously itself is based on the novel Dracula, um, is really fun, and this sort of adaptation that like I really enjoy seeing. I think that this cast is insane. Obviously, there are people in this cast that I knew were going to be great, like Willem Dafoe and Nicholas Holt.
Sure.
But then I was shocked. Like I didn't know Lily Rose Depp had that kind of performance in her. She truly, I mean, I feel like we always talk about that like women give these great performances in horror films, and they're never really like
Right.
fully recognized for them, and I feel like this is definitely going to be one of those. But I was so obsessed with this. I've only seen it once so far. I definitely want to go see it again. It feels like the kind of movie that I'm going to want to see over and over because it's so detailed that I
Hmm.
know there are things that I missed out on. And I've been reading more and more stuff about sort of the theory behind it and how it fits into gothic horror. And
Okay.
I just think there's so much to unpack in it,
Yeah.
and even as someone who's not like a real big horror person, um, I really enjoyed it. I've been telling people that, like, even if you're not a horror person, even if you're a little bit of a scaredy cat, if you can handle like a little bit of blood, um, then I really think it's worth seeing.
What's your relationship to the 1922 film? I guess I should have asked you prior.
I mean, honestly, I've seen it, but it's been years. I need to go
Mhm.
back and, like, revisit it,
Okay.
because I went through a phase where I was, like, very into the, like, old silent horror movies.
Yeah, sure.
Nosferatu was, like, not my go-to. I was a Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera girl. Um,
Okay.
but so I feel
Nothing
like
wrong
I
with
need to
that.
go back and revisit it, and it's funny too because, like, I actually really enjoyed Last Voyage of the Demeter whenever that came
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
So I've been thinking a lot about Dracula and its iterations lately,
Yeah.
and feel like I'm due a reread of the book as well. But yeah,
Well, I echo everything you said. I mean, for me, I'm in the bag for Robert Eggers. That's why I said when, people
yeah,
that know me or people that listen to the show regularly, they're probably like, okay, 10 out of 10 incoming. I mean, he has a new movie out. It's going to be a 10 for me.
yep,
But, you would have to work really, really, really hard for me to not love something that Eggers does, first of all, but also to be this adaptation or reimagining of one of the more classic horror monsters. I
yeah,
mean, probably top five in terms of like the foundational pieces for horror, especially if you're looking even at a subgenre like vampires. Now, of course, Dracula is obviously intertwined with all of that, and
mhm,
the lawsuit and trying to get all the copies of Nosferatu burned and removed from society so that it wouldn't exist. Bram Stoker's wife and all that stuff. But it's basically it's like a potpourri of all of my favorite things from like the Dracula lore. It also has that 1922 Nosferatu kind of like odes to that as well. But more than any of that, it's a Robert Eggers picture. Like
yeah,
and you said it already. He has one of the reasons he's easily one of my favorite filmmakers is because he has a knack for making a movie that it's like it was made in the year that the movie's taking place in. It's
yes.
like it's actual footage from 1838 or whatever it is in Germany
I've
in this film,
seen some people on Twitter who've put together like paintings from the early 1800s in Germany and then shots from the film, and like how similar they look is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, his attention to detail and the authenticity of the dialect even. I mean, the witch
Mm.
is I mean, I feel bad for the witch because Nosferatu might overtake that as my favorite Eggers picture. It's always been the witch. But even in that film, like the dialect and stuff, like I didn't know anything they were saying the first time I saw it. Like, that old New
Yep.
England way of speaking during the Salem witch
Yep.
trials. And, the Northmen kind of continue that. But he's very true to the time period that he's trying to recreate. And in listening to interviews and different things with him about Nosferatu lately, it's so like awesome because this was a passion project for him since he
Mhm.
was in high school. Did you hear that story? Like
Yeah, I saw him talking about that.
yeah, he did like a stage play or something in high school and always wanted to make it a movie. And of course, he's been trying to make this movie for 10 years and now it finally has come out. The performances too. I mean, you mentioned Lily Rose Depp. Man, wow. I was like, I mean, the things that she did with her body, contorting it, and
Yeah.
I mean, it was essentially like scenes from The Exorcist, but there was no, there was no effects or anything employed.
Yep.
It was just her. It's just amazing, and the transformation for Bill Skarsgård as Orlok too is
Oh my
something
god.
we'll get into more in deep on the spoiler
Yeah.
side, but definitely unrecognizable. And people say that a lot, but I mean, literally, like there was no way you would be able to know it was him. I mean,
I
without a doubt.
almost wish that they like hadn't announced that he was playing the character and could have had that be like a reveal at the premiere, because no one would have known.
Well, I've heard people that I'm friends with that went to see it. They're like, I kept waiting for Bill Skarsgård to pop up. The whole time Orlok's in all these scenes or whatever, they're like, "Where's Bill Skarsgård?"
They're
They
like,
didn't
"Where
even
is
realize,
he?"
oh, it's him.
Yeah.
He's Orlok.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he definitely disappeared beyond recognition in the role. And we'll talk about a lot of other things on the spoiler side when it comes to Orlok and the creature design and that kind of stuff. But the craft of the film is literally top tier, like unimaginable from a filmmaking perspective. And then you look at like the
Yeah.
performances, and I love how Eggers, and we'll probably get into like however the conversation takes us, like themes and like
Hmm.
what this may mean or what this may represent. But and I'm not saying none of that is valid or invalid, but what I love about this movie too is it feels like it's just like a straight shot. Like I'm just making Nosferatu. This is my vision
Yeah.
of this classic vampire story. I'm not trying to push a message or a theme or drive a theme home in the movie necessarily. Like I'm
Hmm.
just telling the story, and I love that about this iteration of Nosferatu too, because it's a pretty. I mean, it's basically the story of Dracula for the most part. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very, very
Although
similar.
I do think it's so interesting how, and I don't think this veers into spoilers, but the way that this version really sort of reorganizes itself more around the character of Ellen, and really focuses on her and sort of the things, which I'll get more into this later, but the things that it has to say about the way that women are treated,
Without a doubt.
particularly, you know, medically.
Hmm.
Um, then, and I think the sort of the way that we can see that that still is a thing that exists, um, is really, really great. And I think it's done so well in that it doesn't feel like Eggers is out here trying to like make some big grand statement. It feels like he saw a place to sort of drive something home, and he did without overcomplicating it, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. And I mean,
I don't think he's
I get what you're saying, and I agree with you
yeah.
100% because in the 1922 film, like, obviously Ellen's in it, and
Mhm.
very similar in terms of like the desire and the relationship with Orlok, but the perspective is told from a different POV in that movie.
Mhm.
It's really more Orlok's perspective versus Ellen's in this movie that we get, and I think that works so much better because of the kind of tragic relationship that's playing out, and seeing it from her point of view was much more human, right?
Mhm.
Because you're not going to
Literally.
connect to Orlok as from a
Yeah.
humanity perspective. But you mentioned medically, but I mean, like, just women in general in society, like she was silenced at every turn when she's trying to
Yeah.
tell. She's telling all these dudes like, "This is what's happening. This is what I'm seeing," and they're tying her to the bed. They're giving her chloroform. Like they're just like, "Shut up,"
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like that. I get what you're saying, but yeah, it's an interesting way to kind of tell the same story and just kind of flip it on its head a little bit at the same time.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, I think we're going to be safe and do a little promo break so that we can get into spoilers for the rest of the discussion. So when we come back, guys, we will be into spoilers for Nosferatu. We'll be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Miss Nicole Ackman is here with me, and we're discussing the new Eggers picture, Nosferatu. Made like over $43 million or something like that, by the way. And
It's
it's,
doing great.
yeah, really, really good. I think it's already, is it the first or the second highest grossing Eggers film already? I think it might be
Dang.
the first. And up against A Complete Unknown this weekend, and Mufasa, and just a
Baby
great
girl.
turnout. Baby Girl, yeah, don't forget about Baby Girl, yeah. Just a great turnout for horror, and I love to see it. I went to see it last night at 10:30 p.m. in IMAX, which was the third time I'd seen it,
Mm.
and but I hadn't seen it in IMAX yet, and what an experience! We're going to be talking about this thing the rest of the way, whatever we want to bring up. So anybody listening or watching, you will be spoiled. We're going to be talking about Bill Skarsgård's look and some other things that you may not want to be spoiled about. So just be warned. So you want to start there? You want to start with Count Orlok?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
let's let's start. Let's start with that. So,
Well, one of my favorite things about it is how,
hmm
for the first section of the film, we really only ever see him sort of shrouded in these shadows. And the use of shadow in the film in general is so good. Like in that sort of almost at the closing scene where we see his shadow like
brilliant.
coming around the room, I think is
hmm
so great. But the way that that builds that anticipation, that sense of dread that is so integral to Gothic horror by not letting us see him for so long. By the time they showed him, I was like, "Oh my god, let me see him." Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I will tell you, seeing it in IMAX last night, and I'd already seen it twice. Don't
Oh my
forget, it's not the
god.
first time I saw it. It was terrifying. Like, I mean, the first time we hear his voice, which by the way, I found out after I saw it initially that Skarsgård willingly worked with an opera coach to
Mhm.
lower the register of his voice, and so that he could have that very deep, like old school Transylvania Dracula esque. I don't even know inflection. I don't even really know accent. I don't know how to really even describe it
Yeah.
because it's so different than anything I've really ever heard before. But that was him. Like the voice wasn't enhanced in editing or anything like that. Like that was him. And the first time you hear that voice, and what you're talking about is really the scene when Thomas arrives at the castle and
Mhm.
meets him for the first time, and he's just kind of wandering around the room like a ghost almost,
Yeah.
and the fire's blazing. Thomas is sweating profusely because he's nervous and whatever, and you hear him talking, and you see like the silhouette of his, very large, kind of grotesque, the nature of him, but you don't see anything specific about him, and you see like an eyeball or like his creepy long fingers and fingernails and all these different characteristics that are kind of like in your mind piecing them together until you get the final puzzle and you see the actual design later on in the film. But I just want to tell you that when I saw it last night, knowing everything that was going to happen, I was so scared during that confrontation with Thomas, that initial one, because it's very similar to the character in the film, Thomas, because
Mhm.
Orlok is just like possessing you. It's just like taking you over, and you're just kind of becoming numb to what is happening in front of you because it's of his kind of
I
aura.
I love when a filmmaker is able to do that and take a story that, like, we know what's gonna happen. Like, if you come in with any knowledge of Dracula or of Nosferatu, you know that, like, Thomas is gonna make it out of Orlok's castle. It's kind of that thing of, like, whenever you're watching James Cameron's Titanic and it's like, "Oh, damn, I hope the boat doesn't sink," knowing full well where it's going, and I
Iceberg
really
right ahead. I
admire.
mean, every time,
Yeah.
every time they hit the iceberg.
Every time. And somehow every time I'm like, "Maybe it won't." Like, but I think that's the thing with this is that, like, even though I knew based on my knowledge of the source material that, like, these certain characters are gonna make it to this final confrontation, I still was so convinced that, like, Gorlock was gonna take Thomas out early. Because the way that everything is shot and the cinematography in this film is just perfect.
Off the charts.
Um
Yep.
but also like, specifically the way that they shoot Orlok in this,
Hmm.
and how intimidating Bill Skarsgård is in his, like,
Really? Yeah.
physicality, and
Hmm.
how just, like, hulking he is. And then it's that thing where also I think that they did such a good job with the design, because you think on a certain level typically, right? The thing with horror is that, like, whenever it's in the shadows, it's scarier because you don't know. But then
Right.
you actually see him and you're like, "Oh, no, actually, I think this is scarier."
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was definitely an aura of mystery around that character, and
Mhm.
I'm talking about even all the way back to the marketing and the announcement of Skarsgård playing him. I mean, they
Yeah.
were very, very, very careful to ever show anything other than a silhouette or like a side view or. And I love that. I was really pissed. A couple weeks before the movie came out, somebody released that audio clip of his voice, and I was like,
Yeah.
because I can remember how just impactful it was to hear it for the first time, not
Yeah.
knowing anything about it. It's just, and that was taken away from whoever happened to see that tweet, and that's just one
Yeah.
example. I mean, there's other stuff out there too on TikTok of his face because people are recording it in the theater, and it's like it just came out,
Yeah.
So I hate that kind of stuff, but it's just so impactful when you don't really know what you're getting, and the only real basis you have for that character. I mean, I know the 1979 film, which I actually really like as well, but I haven't
Mhm.
seen in a long time.
Yeah.
But most people are going to immediately go to the 1922 silent film, the original, and it's silent. He's not. You
Yeah.
don't hear his voice. You don't really know what he sounds like. And so you're going into this going, okay, what's he going to sound like? And for it to be that, just like monstrous, but still kind of proper, almost gentlemanly, like it's kind of weird, but it's
Yeah.
like so frightful. Let's talk about the look real quick because we've been
Yes.
talking about the voice and stuff, which
First
is
of all, the
important.
mustache.
The mustache, let's talk about. So, how did that? Go ahead. How did that sit with you when you saw it?
The thing that I love about the mustache is that it is so accurate to this period of German history. And it is so, you see any sort of portrait of nobility in particular in this time period. And they do have these like big hulking mustaches. And I love that. I feel like Eggers is one of the few directors who is so unafraid to sacrifice modern standards of attractiveness for the sake of historical accuracy. And
Yeah.
also I think he understands that like Orlok is not meant to be, Orlok is not Edward Cullen. Like
Right. Right.
that's not what we're doing here.
Right. Well, the
But no, that mustache is just incredible. But I also think partially because it gives us this sense that not only is this like this weird, like decrepit, not really alive man,
hmm
but there's also an element of like he is not only scary in all of the supernatural aspect, but there's also like a class aspect going on here of this is a very wealthy man who has a
hmm
castle, is buying another big ass house. Um and he looks like a nobleman in
Right.
certain aspects, like with the mustache and the really fancy like clothing and stuff. And that's also a way in which he is preying upon this couple because like Thomas goes there because his boss is like, well, if you go make this sale, you're going to make a lot of money from it. And
Right.
he's like, Ellen, we need this money. So I think that's really clever the way that it's designed, not just to sort of play off of the supernatural parts of it, but also this sort of class conflict.
Sure. Yeah. And I agree with you too because I was so impressed with and I got to be honest. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're obviously into history, and you probably knew this already, but I didn't know until maybe a couple weeks ago that it was like in folklore and in the history of that time period that counts and noblemen, 99% of them had like bushy mustaches. Like I just didn't
Yep.
know that. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
saw it
Yeah.
initially. I saw it initially and I go, what the? But like I
Right.
didn't, not
It
that I
looks
didn't
silly
like
to
it.
us.
Yeah, not that I didn't like it. I was just like, that's a weird choice, but okay. I mean, everything else
Yeah.
is working for me. I didn't dislike it. I just thought it was a strange choice until, I
Yeah.
heard some interviews and found out some things after the fact. Like, oh, okay, that's basically what that dude would have looked like in
Yeah.
1838 Germany. And, the vampire especially in American cinema, but like you mentioned, Edward Cullen and just the modernization of like making them hot to kind of fit the romance
The
that
Anne
usually goes,
Rice-ification.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of fit the romantic angle that usually comes along with vampire stories and the sexual kind of nature, which I
Mhm.
mean, I get that part of it, but that's in this movie. And the sexual kind of desire and the passion and the romance is in this movie. But Orlok looks like a literal corpse with maggots coming out of his orifice of his body with a bald head and a giant
Yeah.
mustache,
And I
um,
think
and it
that
still
also
works.
and it speaks to the fact that like, like we're talking about the vampire as this sort of sexual being because obviously there's like the metaphor of him like coming and preying upon his victims. But I also think that like that really works here in that like this original conception of the vampire is in a time where women's sexuality is seen as sort of perverse, and it's literally something that they like send women to insane asylums for.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that he's this like decrepit, creepy being if
hmm
that's how they're viewing women's sexuality at the time. And no, truly, like in the final scene with him and Ellen, whenever you're getting all those shots of him and as he's like the sunlight hits him and everything.
Oh yeah,
I thought
yeah.
the effects on that were
So good.
insane. I need to find out more about how much of that was, practical and like
I think
how
it
they I because I feel like with
I
Eggers
think it
typically
largely was because
it's
Eggers was talking about
mostly
they
yeah.
had he was talking about in one Q&A he did that I saw a clip from that they had like tubes with fake blood coming out of the different parts of his body.
Yeah.
I don't know so much about the eyes if that was all, practical
Mhm.
or not, but a lot at least a lot of it was.
I feel like Eggers is one of those people that like he really uses a lot of these methods of special effects that in a way it feels like Hollywood is like losing because it's so reliant on CGI and stuff.
Yeah.
Um but sometimes I watch it and it reminds me of like really good stuff in like a Hitchcock film.
Oh, sure.
Um but I yeah, no, I think that like everything that they do with him and the combination of like the actual makeup work with the way that he's shot makes it like truly one of the scariest
Yeah.
characters I've seen on film in a long time.
Yeah, he's just a very intimidating being, and I think that's partly what Ellen's going through too, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
she's kind of intimidated by him, but also probably intimidated by like her desire for him and kind of being ashamed that she desires him and doesn't really know why she does.
Yeah.
And they're just joined. Let's talk about let's shift to Ellen because
Mhm.
kind of like how you mentioned earlier, the story really this time around, which was not necessarily the case in the original Nosferatu, is really told from her perspective and her kind of struggle with wanting to rid herself of her, childhood trauma or whatever you want to call it, based on, when Orlok first came to her when she was younger. And essentially, I mean, what would you say? I guess took her virginity. Maybe is the easiest way to put it, without
Yeah.
being too
Yeah.
without being too gross. But and then the rest of the movie after that. But by the way, that opening sequence was like
Insane.
phenomenally well done. I mean,
Yeah.
unbelievable opening number for that movie for sure. But anyway,
Mhm.
that happens in the opening, and then the rest of the movie is Orlok off in Transylvania. She's still in Germany. I can't remember the town's name, but she's still there in Germany with Thomas. So now she's trying to, in a way, detach herself from that history to have her future with Thomas. But in order for that to happen, she has these like preconceived, like she can see things kind of before they happen, which is
Mhm.
also partly because of her connection with Orlok. What do you think when you saw this movie? Do you see any like thematic things coming out of Ellen's story that spoke to you as a woman? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. I mean, this one thing that I was thinking about a lot as I was watching it, and like I mentioned with the way that we see the way that women are treated medically in this, because we see that she's having these fits, and they keep calling in this doctor, and they're tying her to the bed, and they're drugging her, and they're not taking her seriously. I about a year ago went to my doctors and was like, I think I have PCOS. Um, and despite the fact that I have basically every symptom for it, it took a year for me to actually get a diagnosis. And whenever it finally happened, they were like, "Oh yeah, you have PCOS." And I was like, "Cool, yeah, I told you that a
Jesus.
year ago."
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah,
So I'm like just now starting treatment for something that I knew a year ago.
crazy, crazy.
Um, and it's crazy to think that like this is set like almost 200 years ago, and yet we're still
I know.
particularly in the medical field, women dealing with the same thing. And obviously, we see that that's sort of reflected in every element of Ellen's world, even though Ellen has this very sweet husband who adores her.
Hmm.
And I think it's interesting too the way that we have the character of Anna, who's brilliantly played by Emma Corrin,
I agree.
um, to sort of contrast with Ellen, because even Anna doesn't really take Ellen seriously. But Anna's
Yeah,
also
she
very
asked her that. She asked her in that one scene,
yeah,
"Why do you continue to be so contrarian?"
literally. And like
I'm like,
I'm
"Come
like,
on."
girl. And then she pays for that, like literally with her life.
Oh yeah.
But I think that also the way that we see Ellen and Thomas's relationship, which is all, even though Thomas like doesn't really believe her at the beginning, he's still very like sweet and kind with her. And then we see this sort of contrast with Frederick and Anna, who, while he's very devoted to his family, he's also like very intent on getting his male heir. It's very much all about your role is these children. And he just really like can't handle things when everything starts to fall apart, whereas Thomas sort of steps up. So I think that like the mirroring of those relationships, and we see that even though Ellen is sort of in this like best case scenario for a woman in this place and time, in terms of her marriage, she still is so haunted by this thing that occurred to her as a young girl. And I think that that's also something that a lot of women can relate to, is the ways in which something like that stays with you and can influence sort of future relationships. And but yeah, and I think it's very interesting though later on whenever we see Willem Dafoe's character is the first person to take her seriously this whole
Hmm.
time. And everyone thinks he's like this crazy raving like mad guy.
Right.
Um but he's actually the only one who's listening to her.
He's the most human
And
of all of them. Yeah.
exactly, and he's the only one
Yeah.
who understands what she does. And I
Right.
think it obviously there's a lot to say about the fact that like she has to sacrifice herself to save the whole city
Yeah.
and whatever from this. And the way in which, she is able to achieve all of this, but it's at the cost of her life.
Right.
And I don't know, it's such a tragic story
It is.
when
And
it
when
when you look at it from Ellen's perspective.
without a doubt, yeah. And you're right. She had to make that sacrifice in order to rid the town of the plague, which was obviously the plague, but it was also
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
larger kind of curse on the town because
Mhm.
the Nosferatu had arrived for her. So, you
Yeah.
know, as usual, the woman is there with everything on her shoulders and she's got to clean up the mess, essentially.
Yeah.
And she was the only one that had any like real true sacrifice at the end there. And when you were just talking about that, when you were just giving your commentary there, I mean, her character and Willem Dafoe's character are the two that know that. I mean, they know,
Yeah.
like either we're going to end this curse and this is how we're going to do it, or we're not. And he's probably going to take over, you and whoever else he wants to in the path.
Right.
And they kind of had that partnership, which was kind of unspoken. I thought was really cool. Like they had that one scene where she walked him to his door from the carriage. To
Yeah.
basically, they were both just like, so we're doing this, yeah. He's like, yeah,
Yeah.
we need to do this. I mean, basically,
Yeah.
like they both just kind of knew that was how it was going to end, and
And it's funny
never,
that even at this point where like they've convinced the other doctor, they've convinced Thomas like Orlok is real. Um Even then, they know that like these are not men who are willing to accept that it is on her shoulders
right, right,
to fix this.
right.
I also think there's a one of my favorite bits of cinematography in the whole thing, um, is one of the like last shots of her with, Orlok in his like decomposing body basically on top of her. The way that it mirrors the shot that we see of Friedrich with Anna's body in the
Mm.
crypt. It's the
Oh, okay.
exact same positioning
I didn't
basically,
even realize that.
which I
Okay.
think is so interesting whenever you think about the fact that Anna and Friedrich, we also see have this very sexual relationship
Hmm.
in that like he is continually like, I'm trying to get my wife pregnant.
Right,
Um
right, right.
and
Yeah.
the way that that then mirrors Ellen's relationship with Orlok in a way,
Mm.
particularly because he sort of never takes what's happening to Anna seriously, even as she starts trying to tell him, I think is really interesting. And there's a lot that I think the film is telling us about these characters and their relationships with each other and their places in society, just in the framing of things, which I think
Hmm.
is so cool. And Eggers is so smart. Like it
Yeah,
sounds funny,
for sure.
but he really feels like the epitome of like a smart director.
Yeah, I mean, he just the research the guy must do and
Yeah.
the reading and watching and, just like I said, his attention to detail and accuracy is I mean, even if you don't like the
Insane.
movies, it's something you're always going to admire that he goes to those
I
lengths. You know.
got so overexcited, and there's that one scene where, Thomas has come back, and Ellen sort of confronts him, and which, first of all, Lily Rose Depp's performance in that scene is, like, in my top 5
I mean,
scenes of the whole
I mean,
year.
don't get me
Like,
started. I mean, she's like basically
yeah,
playing like 3 different personalities in that one 2 minute scene. I mean, it's everywhere.
so insane.
Yeah, it's so good.
Like, it's so good. But also when she, like, rips her dress open, and
Hmm.
I, being the history nerd that I am, got, like, super overexcited because
Well,
she's actually wearing, like, the proper undergarments with,
oh
like, the
wow, okay,
chemise under the corset, which is, like, one of the number one
awesome.
things that movie costumers do wrong.
Ah,
Um, so I was so
okay.
excited. I was like, "Oh my
I didn't
god,
know that
Lily
either.
Depp." It totally took me out of the moment a little, 'cause I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
Oh my God.
Eggers, I
Yeah.
knew I could count on you."
Wow, that's
Like,
awesome. Yeah.
but yeah,
I,
no, I just think that, like, his attention to detail in, like, every aspect of it,
yeah.
but especially in the little ways that he lets us see things from different characters' perspectives
Hmm.
is really smart.
Yeah. I had read too that after seeing this version of the film that because it kind of starts in the first act of the film, not the opening, but beyond that, where she's like sleepwalking, and
Yeah.
that's when they start to tie her to the bed, and all that kind of inhumane shit starts to happen with her kind of
Yeah.
care. I had seen that in the folklore that Eggers was kind of basing this movie off of, that when you were sleepwalking, or if you were a sleepwalker, you were thought to be communing with another realm. Um,
Yeah.
they didn't know what sleepwalking was back then, so they kind of thought
Right,
that
right.
when you were dreaming, you were talking to somebody in another plane or whatever. So that kind
Yeah.
of plays in a little bit to this story too, about her connection with Orlok and the sleepwalking and dreaming kind of aspect of it. And again, Willem Dafoe's the only one, kind of the Van Helsing kind of character of this movie. He's the only one that
Yeah.
really knows, like, she's not here. She's with this dude. She's
Yeah.
communing somewhere else. And they're
And
all
not
just
to
like, oh, what?
totally derail, but I love the way that this film brings in different folklore around vampires, particularly, like, whenever Thomas goes to Orlok's castle, and he has these, like, weird interactions with the peasants there.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and he sees their, like, ritual that they're doing,
Right.
and the fact that that is, like, founded in, like, Romanian folkloric tradition around vampires, because I think it's hard for us to understand sometimes, particularly as Americans, because that was never really a thing here because
Hmm.
of the timing of when Europeans came to America.
Yeah, sure.
But, like, vampires were, like, a real concern for people at one point. Like,
Yeah, I
they
mean,
were genuinely worried about this.
look at the hysteria for the Salem witch trials from a witchcraft perspective. I mean, people were just,
Exactly.
something was different, and they just freaked out. Dude, by the way,
Yeah.
since you mentioned that scene, I'll just ask you: so you think Thomas was actually there in the woods and saw that, or do you think it was part of his? Was he dreaming it?
I don't know if I think he's probably dreaming it, but I do know that I read a thing about the fact that, like, what we see in that ceremony,
Hmm.
that these, because I do think those are meant to be, like, some of these peasants he's been interacting with
Right.
earlier in the day. That is actually based on, like, real rituals that they would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which is, I think it's
It's
so interesting to, like, tie some of that into it, because
right.
obviously that goes, like, way further back than even the time that, like, Dracula was written.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think one of the things that, and I'm really excited to, like, see the movie again, is that there are so many parts where you're not entirely sure, I think,
Hmm.
of whose perspective are we seeing this from?
Hmm.
Is that person really there?
Right.
Like, what are we actually seeing?
Well, yeah, I
Um,
agree. So I'll elaborate a little bit, I think, on what you're saying, because I agree. And what I was going to mention to you is that I love how in this film, especially in certain scenes, like I'm
mhm.
thinking, I'm thinking predominantly right now of the scene after all of that, when Thomas is going to the castle and he's
Yep.
alone in that dark, snowy corridor of the forest, and you have that
Yeah.
awesome 180 camera shot that kind of the camera spins around with him in the center, and there's basically a ghost carriage waiting on him to take him to the castle. But
Yep.
that whole scene is what I'm thinking about right now. But it did happen a few other times in the movie as well, where like Eggers basically blends like supernatural with like reality, and it's like they're both existing at the same time. So you don't really know where you are. Like they're
Yep.
but like it's a supernatural kind of thing that's happening, but it's happening right there in real time and space. So it just makes it a very confusing, in a good way, like
Mhm.
kind of mind bending type of watch, And then in that scene in particular, I mean, aside from the cinematography and stuff, which I mean, my jaw was
Yeah.
on the floor the whole
Yeah.
time. But once he's in the castle, and we already talked about meeting Orlok for the first time, so you're kind of hit with that right away. I thought the pacing in this film was brilliant too. Like I thought I was
Oh my
never
god, yeah.
for like never for more than like 5 seconds was I like something needs to happen. Like it was always something
Yeah.
happening.
Every time
Always
I
something
got
interesting.
comfortable, it
Yeah,
was like, just kidding.
yeah,
Which I think,
exactly.
again speaks to how well he's able to sort of maintain that like dread, that
Hmm.
every time you start to get a little bit comfy with what's going on and the setting that you're in, it's like,
Hmm.
oh no, we're taking it from you.
Yeah. You mentioned the final shot too. That kind of the overhead shot. I mean, that looks like a German like impressionist painting. I mean, honestly, I mean, it was like the
Yeah.
the purple like lilac flowers on the side of the bed, and like the sunlight was the way it was coming in, and just you could tell that he kind of intense the hues on the reds from the blood, and like it was
Yeah.
just a very purposeful like. My guess is that somebody like Robert Eggers probably had this green lit and knew he was going to make this, and probably thought of that shot, and he probably
Yes.
thought, I'm going to work the whole movie to this shot. That's what it felt like to me,
Yeah.
when I saw
And
it. It
I
was
think
such a perfect.
also, talking about we see the daylight come in and it's so jarring because so much of the film is so dark. Although I will say, take note to all other filmmakers, there is a way for your film to be dark and us still see what's going on.
Yeah, I did it. Yeah,
Um,
I agree. It
they
was so good.
achieved that. Well done. But no, like how dark the rest of the film is, and then that moment where the daylight breaks through, and it's like obviously it's having this huge effect on Orlok because it's killing him.
Hmm.
But it's also
Hmm.
very jarring as an audience member,
It is, yeah.
that you finally have that light hitting you.
And what I want to tell you about that scene too, that I love, and I want to see
Yeah.
if you recognize it. You probably did with the Ellen connection, but her like little smirk at Orlok
Yep.
at the end.
Hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Where he
Yep.
like very unspoken. Neither one of them say anything.
Yeah.
He sits up from he was sucking her blood and stuff, and he sits up from her, and the sunlight hits him, and that's when he's done for. But he
Yeah.
has that split second where he looks back to her before he loses all his eyes and stuff, and
Yeah.
she's just basically smiling at him like, "I got you, you son of a bitch," without saying
Yeah.
anything, and then he
Yeah.
dies.
And it
Um,
is
I
satisfying
loved it.
because even though, we know that like she has to make this grand sacrifice to save everyone, at the very least she goes out knowing that she has achieved it. And I think that that at least, I don't know, it sounds funny to be like it's comforting, but it is in a way to know that like you see her at the very end regain her agency against him in a
Hmm.
way by being able to do this. And
Right.
yeah, it's so satisfying. Even like I was like, "Oh yeah, she got him," and then I was like, "Wait a second, like
I
at
was
what
asking.
cost?"
You're right. Yeah, I was asking about themes too. I wrote down here in my notes that
Mhm.
we're talking about this ending sequence, and I said that Ellen, that whole thing represented childhood trauma for her, so she needed it to be ugly so that it could be brought into the light,
Yeah,
literally here, so that she can move past it. But obviously the tragic twist there is that in order to move past it, she's also perished,
yeah,
and having to do that to end the plague for all of her family and friends and people in the town. So it is a really tragic story. I want to ask you, because there's been some debate over this.
okay.
Is this a love story? Is this romantic in any way, in your opinion? And if so, why or why not?
Okay, so my like hot take here is that I don't think it is romantic in terms of the relationship between Ellen and Orlok. I think that is a very gothic tale about obsession and sexuality and desire and particularly in this time period, shame associated with women's sexuality. I do think where it is a love story that some people are overlooking, I think this is very common in this sort of gothic romance, gothic horror genre, is that there is a very sweet love story happening between her and Thomas as they're both
Yeah.
desperately trying to save each other.
Hmm.
And, she is so motivated by wanting to save him too. And he's trying to get back to her and save her. And I think that's very sweet. In many ways, I think like you can draw parallels as one can do from it to Dracula with like Phantom of the Opera. And you've got, the Phantom is this figure of obsession and sensuality, and then
Hmm.
Ral is this figure of like actual romantic love. But I do, I understand, particularly because of other vampire iterations, why people want to sort of read that kind of relationship into it. But I don't see that there when she
No, I
spends
see
the
it
entire
more.
time trying to escape him.
Yeah, I see it more as, if anything, like lust and desire, maybe,
Yeah.
the libido wanting what it wants, but not romance, not love. I didn't see that. Because
Yep.
she is obviously, well, I mean, it could be how you want to phrase it, but in my mind, she's a prisoner to Orlok, really. I mean, she
Mhm.
can't kind of escape his grasp control that he has over her. And she wants to, because she's been a prisoner to that since she was a child, and has
Right.
just always been trying to forget it or get away from it or whatever. So I didn't see it as romantic either, although I do agree with you because Thomas never gave up on her too. Because
No.
if you think in modern, especially in our society, I mean, I don't know other countries, but I mean, dudes are running for the hills if a girl's causing that much trouble. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying I would, but I mean,
Well,
generally speaking,
and I mean, legitimately though, in this time period, in the early, 1800s, especially in the 1830s, husbands are left and right throwing their wives into insane asylums for far less than this. So the fact that he
right, right.
is not taking that path, like, it sounds funny to be like, oh my God, he really loves her. He didn't try to put her in an asylum.
I know.
But like that's true to a certain
That's true,
extent.
yeah. But I mean, even when she
And
like she
yeah,
recounts one of her dreams with Orlok, and she's basically telling him, and he's like, don't tell anybody that ever again. Don't ever say that
yeah,
again.
he's like,
But
don't say that.
yeah, he's like, I don't necessarily believe you, but I don't want you to tell anybody else that because they're going to throw you into some kind of asylum.
Hmm.
But he
Hmm.
never gave up on her.
Yeah,
He's jumping out of vampires' castle windows and falling in rivers, and nuns are, and the whole time he's like, I'm gonna be with her. I'm gonna get back to her.
yeah,
So that is a love story, and of course she was profoundly in love with him,
yeah,
and just knew that this like burden that had been on her whole life was going to really drag them down as a couple, and of course
yeah.
it did at the end of the day.
I also think that one thing that really struck me in it too was that there is actually this very strong connection that we see between her and Anna as well. And even though Anna is sort of more frustrated with her and her rantings and ravings towards
Yeah,
the
she just
beginning,
yeah.
but at the same time, she's totally fine with her coming to live with them.
Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah, you can move in while you're having your crazy moments." Like,
Mm.
and I think some of that frustration is like, homegirl's also pregnant and has 2 kids. I'm like, she's allowed to tell Ellen to shut up.
Right.
But the affection with which these women treat each other in that scene where she comes and asks if she can sleep in the bed with Anna,
Hmm.
um, and I think the fact that, like, Orlok goes for her first also speaks to Ellen's love for her, and,
Hmm.
I think that's a really interesting element to it as well, in that we see this, like, strong romantic love and this strong platonic love, and then we see whatever's going on in between Ellen and Orlok, and we know it's neither of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved Aaron Taylor Johnson in this. I know he's been getting some like mixed like
I
commentary
love
on Twitter and stuff about his performance, but I thought it was
I think he's great.
perfectly, oh my God, perfectly hammed up to like the aristocratic kind of almost
Yes.
absent-minded, like cliched, millionaire that just like wants to pay to make everything go away. And he has those really selfish comments like, I haven't slept in days, and my house is a bedlam, and like all that kind of shit. When the world's like crumbling around
Yeah,
him.
and I think
But it's
it's
so
great because it
innocent at the same
gives
time. Like you still love him. You
right.
know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and it gives Thomas this foil where you see, like, this is what we're gonna say, like, a normal guy of 1830s Germany is gonna react like to this, and I love him so much in Anna Karenina, and to get to see him go back to doing a character more like that, which we've not seen him do in a while, I thought was very fun, and I mean, that's those scenes towards the end where he loses his wife and daughters, and he's
Brutal.
so distraught over it.
Brutal.
I
Yeah.
think I think he's quite good.
I
I,
do too. I do too.
I've seen all
But
the
I think,
discourse.
yeah, but you see the discourse, and you know what I mean. That they're taking his like kind of buffoonery as like bad acting, but I think that's
I
good acting in the way
I think
that
it's exactly
somebody
what
like
he's
that wouldn't
trying
be.
to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I
And
also, like, I don't know, I think he's also playing into tropes of the genre. Like, a
mhm,
lot of these gothic horror tales, or any sort of gothic tales really, have this character of the aristocratic man who's
right.
kind of a buffoon. Like,
Right.
he's the Edward Linton of Wuthering Heights in some ways.
Right.
Like,
It's
you know.
almost like in the old, Clark Gable, Cary Grant days when they would, have these dramatic scenes, and it would be like when you see him now, it's like they're overacting, kinda.
Yes,
But it's
yes.
like that's kind of what he was doing, but it was
Yeah,
obviously purposeful in my opinion. So
yeah.
I think it's a great performance. I
I
think
think
he
it's
fit that
awesome.
role perfectly.
Mhm.
What do you think about Willem Dafoe in this? I mean,
I
obviously
mean,
the know-it-all character that comes in and
it's
kind of helps
Willem
save the day.
Dafoe.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, he's a
um,
fucking madman.
and, like, I love him working with Eggers. Like, I think they're such a good match for each other's work.
Yeah,
I love to see Dafoe in a role like this, but I also think what's really fun about this is that, he's this sort of scholar who's been kicked out of academic circles for believing in the supernatural and all of this, and they're sort of like, we wouldn't normally call him, but he may actually have insight on this. But we also see that, like you were saying earlier, he's really the only one to see Ellen and to meet her on her level, and I think that he's able to imbue that character with such an empathetic um mindset without, like, having to do too much, without even having that much screen time, and that feels like such a Willem Dafoe thing to be able to do.
yeah,
Um, but God, and I love, again, like, I think there are bits where in a different film it would seem like overacting, but
yeah.
it's actually just playing to genre,
Right.
because he is in some ways like the mad scientist here.
For sure. Yeah, and there's that one scene that really stands out in relation to that. It's a really simple thing, but I think it was done purposefully, and it does play to that like overacting from like the 1940s. But like, there's that one scene where he's talking to Aaron Taylor Johnson and Thomas, and he's like, "Meet me at my place tonight," and he like turns out and storms out really like
I also
soap
love, what is
opera
his
dramatically.
his line where he's all like, "I've seen things that would have, like, Isaac Newton crawling back
Yeah,
into his mother's womb."
that's
Like,
it. That's it. Yeah,
God, I
and then
love it. I
and
love it.
the whole scene when they're burning the sarcophagus at the end, and he's got the
Yes.
fire around him, and he's like, I can't remember his quote, but he's like saying something about how he's got to get back to Ellen, and he's like, "It's not gonna save you, man. Burn it
I'm like,
all down," and he's
I
screaming.
need that screen grab right now.
That's so good, man. So good. Yeah, but between Eggers and Yorgos, I mean, he could work forever just doing this
Oh
weird
my
shit and
god.
just mad
And
scientist
as he
roles. And
should.
yeah, I mean, he's so good at it. All right, well, let's wrap up on it. We obviously dropped a dime. Both of us did. I did not expect that. And
Yeah.
I wonder what Nick would have brought to the show had he had a chance to see it, but he's been sick. But a 10 out of 10 from both of us on Nosferatu. What closing thoughts do you have before we wrap up here, Nicole? Or is there anything we didn't talk about,
I
I should ask, that you might want to
trying to
mention?
think. I think the one thing I want to mention is that I do feel like one of the performances in this that's getting a little bit overlooked is how genuinely great Nicholas Holt is. First of all, because the way that he portrays the fear of Orlok and the way that that bounces back onto the audience, I think is really great. And also his like desperation to help Ellen is so well done without, and I think that's actually one of the really grounding performances of the film in a way, because he isn't necessarily playing more to this like old style horror movie acting like the others are. But
Right.
it's also not the same kind of really bizarre out there physicality that like Lily Rose Depp is doing. And he makes a, my friend Dan Bayer said he makes a perfect damsel in distress. And
Yeah.
it's true, he
I
does.
mean,
Like,
he's a cuck in this movie for sure, but he does a great fucking job in this film. I
but
agree,
also like
and
this the castle scenes. I'm
yeah,
like,
I mean, he is so terrified. Like, I'm
yeah,
assuming acting terrified, but he
yeah.
had me
He has
believing that he
said,
was like scared to death.
Nicholas Holt did say that he was genuinely afraid the first time
Yeah,
he saw Bill in
because
costume, and I believe it.
didn't Eggers like purposefully he didn't see him before the scenes and stuff.
Hmm.
I think I'd heard that. So like that was the first time he
Yep.
saw him. So it
And
probably
and I
was
too would
very
be
like,
scared.
yeah, no shit, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, dude. Yeah. No, Nicholas Holt is great. I appreciate that shout out for sure.
He's so great in it. But no, I really do look forward to seeing this again, because I do think it's something that like people are gonna want to revisit multiple times. I definitely urge people to go see it in the theater as many times as they can. And it just truly has proven to me. I don't know what I would say I think is like the my favorite of Eggers' work. I do think this is maybe his best work in terms of sort of everything he's ever done culminating.
Hmm.
Um
Hmm.
and obviously like he's only going to go up from here, I'm sure, but I think that I was kind of resistant to giving it a 10. But then I thought about it and I was like, no, on every level, from the crafts to the direction to the
It's
writing to
literally
the
perfect.
performances,
Yeah,
it's a perfect movie.
it really
And it's
is.
one that I think we'll still be watching and talking about in 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
I totally see this being shown and taught in like college courses.
Hmm.
And also I'm so excited, between this and then Del Toro has Frankenstein
I
coming.
know.
I am so here for a
I
gothic
know.
horror revival.
Yeah.
And I do hate what it says about typically whenever gothic horror becomes big, what that means for us as a society. But I do think we're already in that place. So we may as well get as much gothic horror out of it as we can.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, for me, I mean, and wrapping up, I mean, we said a lot of the things I wanted to make sure I touched on tonight, but I mean, this is thus far the movie of the decade for me. This is the best film that I've seen this decade. I mean, period. I've seen it 3 times to make sure I wanted to make that statement, but I'm making it. I think it is Eggers' best picture, definitely from a craft perspective, but more so the story and just the way he decided to flip it to Ellen here and create a more human story about a monster, which is not what we got in previous iterations. It was more like the humans were victims to the monster. So I love that kind of twist on the classic tale. Anything that you want to mention about the craft is A+. The performances are out of this world. Um, no awards recognition will be given to Lily Rose Depp. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, but there should be. She is easily one of the best performances this year. And
Easily.
I mean, this is Nosferatu, and she's like carrying this film. I mean,
Yeah.
performance wise, I mean, she's, obviously the craft and Skarsgård's makeup and, all the other things that go into it too. But performance wise and connection to the audience as our conduit is Ellen in this movie. And her kind of tragic tale keeps us going through the whole runtime until that beautiful final shot. So I echo what you said. Go see it. See it in the theater if you can. Best movie of the year. Best movie of the decade. Robert Eggers' best movie. Fuck it. I'm putting all that on there. I'll take it all in the comments. Whatever you guys want to say to me. But that's it. Nicole, thank you so much for joining me for our review of Nosferatu and for filling in for Nick this week. I'm sorry I sound like Count Orlok tonight, but I have a sore throat, as I told you before we started recording. Tell everybody
Well,
where they can find you out there online.
yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I was so excited to get a chance to come and talk about this movie. Obviously, I had a lot to say. So thank you for letting me yap about proper, 19th century clothing. Um,
I love that
but
tidbit.
you
I did not know that. I love that you brought that to my
yeah,
attention.
it made me very excited. But you can find me online. I'm on Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, Letterboxd. I think that's it, at Nicole Ackman 16. And then you can find my work mostly over at Culture Cabinet, which is culturecabinet.com, where we cover film, TV, theater, books, music, all sorts of culture stuff. And we have some year-end content coming, which will mean more of me talking about Nosferatu. So,
Of course, same here. Yeah, I'm like, what list can I not put it on? I guess I won't put it on my best
right.
animated movies list, but that's about it probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got a lot of year-end stuff too, so I feel that. Well, Nicole, thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure to have you, and it was a delight to discuss Nosferatu with you. And you'll be back hanging out with me in a couple weeks because we're going to be doing our Golden
Yes.
Peas
Can't wait.
Movie Awards again. And Nicole graciously helps me announce the nominees every year, so that's coming up on January 8th as you're listening to this. And Nick will hopefully be back next week. I don't know what we're covering. I think we're doing a movie draft next week, but I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me. So
Once he makes it out of Warlock's castle.
I was going to say, if he's still in the castle, who knows? We may never record again. I'm not sure. But Nicole, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Everybody else, we will chat next week. Everybody take care. Is there any cool Orlok? I already did the crow with the cock thing or whatever at the
I
beginning.
know.
What,
I'm trying
what
to
else?
think if
What
there's
else can I
another.
say
I feel like
to
we need a
sign us
Willem Dafoe
off?
line. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what Orlok says.
I don't know. I should have prepared something in Romanian.
You are not, what does he say? You are not of this world.
Yeah, you are not of this world.
Yes, you're not of humankind. I don't know what that means. I think that's a compliment though, but thank you for being here.
Yeah.